Hi everyone, welcome to episode number 15 of Just Crunch It. With us today we have Grant Hushek, owner of GrantBot Process Consulting. GPC is a no-code automation agency catering to private equity-backed and backable companies in the low to mid-market. Grant recently left Hamptons, a private community of exceptional founders where he was the head of digital operations. Prior to that, Grant took an attempt at starting up with Underdog Analytica, a quant fund for sports betting. Grant is a man of processes and a huge advocate for all things no code. He was in the critical role of customer value architect at Celonis, which is a phenomenal business in itself and probably something we're going to talk about a lot in just a while. Grant has interned at places like Boeing, Graphene Audio, and is a member of various venture groups, tutoring groups, and communities. Welcome to the show, Grant. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much for everyone who's listening at home. What a fun opportunity to talk about data and process. I'm super excited to nerd out with you.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Like your profile, the kind of experiences you have had, even though those were internships, they're very different industries. Like, was there a resolute somewhere inside of you that I don't want to go the conventional route because what you chose to do, I don't see a lot of people doing that, and I love it. Like, it's very impressive.
Yeah, there was a little bit of underlying tone as to why I chose graphene audio as my first internship. So I studied materials engineering, and that's a really niche type of engineering. I think I graduated with about 20 people, and there was a company called Aura that was making headphones, like over-ear headphones, with the speaker cone made out of graphene. Super interesting material. And so I begged them for 2 years, saying, "Please, can I work for you? Can I work for you?" And they finally said yes for an unpaid internship in Montreal. So I flew to Montreal, had an awesome experience, learned that I loved startups. And then I wanted to make sure I really love startups. So I worked for the biggest company I could find, which was Boeing with 160,000 employees globally. So found out I really didn't like that and I stuck with startups.
Yeah, I see that, and plus all of your experience with communities. You're a member of Hamptons. I see that you're also a member of like Rev Genius, which is a community for a lot of revenue leaders. Like both are great communities. I'm part of both. Hampton also great. Like, what do you say are your top three learnings overall?
Oh, good question. When it comes to the learnings from Hampton, being surrounded by so many successful founders, one thing that I really took away was that we're all the same and that everyone just had a passion or they found something that they could charge money for and do at scale. Like it's not that crazy of a concept. And so I really got to see that there's a million ways to make $1 million a year, which I really like. That's a huge learning in and of itself. It just kind of breaks down that wall of what's possible
Yeah.
with Rev Genius, I think sales is one of those skills that just always needs to be sharpened. And so I've started to invest a lot more time or time and money into my own kind of sales refinement. And that also leads back to the third lesson from Hampton, which is it's okay to hire a coach and ask for help and pay someone to look around the corner for you. Because so many times I think entrepreneurs think that they need to go it alone, muscle through, and just suffer in a way. It's like it's masochistic. But it's okay to say, hey, I actually want to talk to someone that's been there before, pay for their time, respect their time, and try to get around the corner a little bit faster. So I'm trying to take all of those into this new experience with GrantBot Process Consulting.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in just a while. But to your point, one thing that comes top of my mind is thanks to all of these communities like Hamptons, and I'm seeing a lot of them popping up around the globe now.
Mm-hmm.
There is at least a safe space for a founder to go talk about. Like one of these community meetups that they had locally back in India. When I was in India, they were launching this community, which is for Indian founders, and their tagline was, "Hey, sometimes you just have a co-founder problem, and you can't come and talk about it." To anyone, like you can't go to your VC because they're going to talk about or like doubt the whole team that they backed. You of course can't talk it with or like to your co-founder. Sometimes there are boundaries you don't want to cross, or like you don't want to bring in work matter into like the personal life. And in those scenarios, you
Mm-hmm.
just have a group of people who have gone through it. So like that is such a safe space. It's such a biased motive. I love it. But I want to go to GrantBot Consulting and everything you're doing. But before that, you talked about like graphene audio, and then you talked about Boeing, and then while you say that you love startups, you were at Celonis. Like, what stage were you? What stage was Celonis at when you were there? Because I know Celonis to be a phenomenal company, and it's amazing. Whenever I look at their website, it almost unreal that they have built a business around what they do. That is
Mm-hmm.
so like you. It doesn't come very naturally that hey, you could make a business out of doing this thing. But now that they have done it, I can totally see the value into it, right? Like, and it was probably 2022 when I ran into Celonis first time. It's very successful. It's something, as I said, not many people would think of, or at least at the very least, you'd think of maybe as a service angle only. Could you tell me a little bit about what Celonis is? Like, how does it differ from the process of information gathering? Like, because they use these terms like process intelligence. Like, imagine we know nothing and like just walk us through that world.
Totally. So I was actually at Celonis around 2022, same time that you had kind of run into it. So we were there kind of interacting with it at the same time. And if we break it down into its real nuts and bolts, you've got process intelligence being qualitative and quantitative. And so the qualitative might be you work in engineering and I ask you, how long do we think it's going to take to produce this widget, right? And you give me an estimate and we look at how the thing goes from step A of assembly to packaging to delivery, right? And I'm going to ask you questions about where you think there's a bottleneck. And that's a very qualitative, subjective data. What
Yeah,
Celonis does and what really like captivated me when I was there, and I still think it's incredible software, is that they take what's this concept of like a digital footprint from every unit of production. So that could be an invoice, it could be a desk from IKEA, it could be the bottle of Coca-Cola, it could be any of these things, but every time that output, that thing changes hands, there's a timestamp. So like if we're creating an invoice, then you have the invoice requisite being created, like someone wants to order this thing. Then it hits someone's desk and they say, great, at 10:01 on Friday, it touched someone's desk. On Tuesday, the line items were filled out and it was sent for approval. On Friday, the following Friday, that approval was made. Then on Tuesday again, it was sent out and then it was paid. And like every single step, and we can go into, the 20th, 50th version of this where there's so many complicated steps that come in, where there's extra approvals, rejections, sent back. There's so many different things that can happen, but there's a digital footprint, there's a timestamp associated with every single step. And so what Celonis does, and what's really incredible, the software is called the execution management software. It shows you this kind of mind map of all of those digital footprints, ranging from least complex to most complex. So you can see every single bottle of Coca-Cola, for instance, that gets produced in this mind map. It's really, watch the demo because words will not define how impressive it is.
no, but what happens, like let's say I have a footprint of, so if we take the Coca-Cola example, there's a bottle
Mhm,
that's being manufactured, and I'm assuming there are multiple steps in manufacturing. So like maybe there's the outer case that is coming in, and then the drink is being poured into it. You have like the wrapper coming around, there's a cap that is coming in, and all
Yep.
of it is being timed, right? Like from there it gets loaded onto, like I think a crate. That crate is like
hmm
shipped out to a truck. It
hmm
reaches a inventory store or whatever, and then from there it's shipped out to a local store. Like,
hmm
okay, I'm doing a timestamp of all of these things, like, but what do I do on top?
Totally. So now that we have all this data aggregated, that quantitative process intelligence, their software now shows you where the most inefficiencies or time between steps is taking place. So, for instance, I could tell you using the Celonis software that between the cap being placed on the bottle and the bottle being put into a crate, on average, that takes 4 days.
Hmm.
So then you might think, 4 days, I'm just moving the bottle from point A to point B. So then Coca-Cola will say, how can we maybe speed that up to get the,
Yeah.
the crate to the distribution facility a little bit faster? And when we look at things like the IKEA desk example, if we know that the desk is packaged and waiting for fulfillment or for delivery, then if there's a 5 day or a 1 day gap, in certain instances, we can start to see, okay, well, model A of the desk is shipped within 24 hours, but model B of the desk is shipped in 5 days. Why is that the case? Is it because
Hmm.
that model A is packaged differently and it is ready to go right away, and model B is not packaged correctly? Is it that the different teams are putting their model B desks in a different place where the delivery person doesn't see them? Like
Yeah.
these are the types of quantitative process intelligence that, as you were saying at the beginning, you could easily see, hey, let's go for service on this and just be consultants. But what they've done is they've have this execution management software. They bought Integromat, which is Make now, Make.com, and those two together allow you to automate processes and make process intelligent recommendations. So that's a pretty nice one-two punch.
But like the next step for this, like even in the Coca-Cola example or the IKEA example, or let's say it's a software flow, anything like that widget example that you're talking about, the next step is usually outside the software, correct? Like if I have to improve the timestamp between the cap and the crate,
Mhm.
I may have to like put two people there, or I may have to deploy a robot, or I may have to like figure some alternative which is outside the scope of what I can do on Celonis. Like, does that feedback ever come in, or like is Celonis also working with people to like sort of consume that data and see that okay, this change was made and here is what the impact is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one thing that Celonis, because it is this enterprise software group, right? They are trying to create what's called a center of excellence in the companies that they work with. So if they're
Yeah.
working with Starbucks, for instance, they'll try to create a team inside of Starbucks that says, hey, we found the inefficiencies, right? We know that there's a 4 day delay between the cap being put on and the bottle getting put in the crate. So do we need to think about putting another human there? Do we need to think about, as you said, maybe a different robot that moves the bottles into the crates and we have a conveyor belt? So that's kind of like as you said, when it exits software, it becomes the physical world. That's where the services and the humans that actually are using the Celonis tool play a much bigger role. So when it leaves the digital world and those, like we're moving a physical good, that's when the center of excellence, the consulting partners of Celonis, will then make those recommendations to say, we know how the business works. This is the type of solution we're going to create versus the automatic solution, the automated solution.
But you were in the role of a customer value architect, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And enterprise customers, if anything, they're very, very, very tricky to navigate. Like they change slow. What you said, that you will have a team of 15 people identifying, hey, we have identified these inefficiencies at Starbucks. That takes time. Like how do you go about that? Like how do you build that trust?
Yeah, it's a really good question because when you've got a software that is as expensive as Celonis, you need to prove that value repeatedly, right? Um, and so I think that it's both buy-in during the sales process, it's communication during the pilot program because you rarely can turn these things on all at once because there's so much data that's being connected to the two systems. Um, and at the end of the day, it's that relationship. It's, are you going to get enough buy-in consecutively to ramp up to that big, we crossed over the point of the mountain where now we can only have, benefit. But it's an uphill battle getting all of those different data sources piped into the EMS, making sure the engineering teams are on board with it. That is definitely a struggle.
Got it. And I remember chatting with you about automated process mining. Like what angle is that? Is that something on top, or is this like broadly the umbrella of whatever we've been talking about?
Yeah, so I think that the process mining phase, the actual concept of it is this idea of Celonis taking the digital footprints, or companies like Celonis taking those digital footprints and revealing inefficiencies. The automation side of it, I think, plays two roles. One for a Celonis partner, where you're saying, you've got a client, let's use Starbucks because everyone knows that name. You've got Starbucks that's interested in using Celonis, but they don't really understand what the EMS can do for them. It's a very uphill battle on that sales process, very long sales cycles. What I'm kind of starting to work my way into with the agency is to say, we can do a qualitative audit, a qualitative search and rescue mission for a few automations and show you what the output can be if we were to automate. If you were to use Celonis on your whole company, this is what an automation would look like, and this is the value you would receive. So there's room for automation in the sales process, but then ultimately the goal of Celonis is, as you said, finding improvements in the physical world, but also using that investment that Celonis made on Integromat to automate the digital processes as well. So using different filters and systems to say, yes, this invoice should always be approved, or this type of procurement process can just flow between steps much faster if we need to get a document signature and then move it over to this other department. Those are just automated steps that humans don't need to necessarily be involved in. So it plays both sides. The automation can be on both sides of that process.
Grant, it's brilliant you brought this point up because we have a lot of data curious folks in our audience, right? Like, and they're data enthusiasts. And one complaint that I have run into more than often is not capturing enough of how the data world works for someone who is non-technical. Like I've had people who talk about all the deepest things in engineering layer by layer. I know you are someone who has played around or likes to explore no code world a lot. And I want to know, like, so in context of even the GrantBot that you're talking about, right? Like that whole consulting process, like what is analyzing qualitative data is one thing, but how are you capturing that data, right? Like, and does that need a technical background per se? Could you talk about some more examples? Because I think what you're talking about ultimately is that, hey, we have certain digital footprints. It could be Celonis, it could not be Celonis, and you want to like do something with that information, and you want to like automate it, right? Like eventually, I don't know if today the way you are thinking about it, whether GrantBot would work first with Celonis data set and then like maybe everyone else. But could you just give us more examples on what is like the qualitative data capture process look like without a technical background, or for someone like no tech background, how should they be thinking about it?
Totally. So I'll clear the air. I am allergic to coding. I have tried 3 languages. They don't like me. I don't like them. It's all right. I've moved past it. But when it comes to the no code world, like it was the first time that I felt like I could actually build something. And I loved it because I could move data around between systems and like it clicked in my brain. And like I said, I studied engineering, so I had that advantage, but I don't think it's necessary. I think a lot of the people in this space are not engineers by trade. And so if you have a non-technical background and you're interested in this no code space, you can really build out a lot of interesting things just with your own general curiosity. So I'll start there. When it comes to capturing this qualitative data, the way that we do it is we have process consultants like me that understand how the no-code tools can talk to each other. So how you can use something like Zapier or Make or Airtable, HubSpot even, to talk between your tech stack. And once you have that knowledge of kind of just how the data can flow, you can really talk to anyone and say, okay, well, instead of using HubSpot for your CRM, you're using Pipedrive. Well, you still have a contact record, you still have a company record, you still have a deal record. So I know that I can move that information from point A to point B whether you were using HubSpot or Pipedrive. And so once you have a confidence about how these tools work, and that just comes with curiosity, having things to work on. I think I always tell people, you want to learn how to use no code tools, write out 5 if then statements and then try to automate them. And I can get into that more, but right now, capturing qualitative information is knowing enough about the platforms that you no longer need to be working in the tools that you are most comfortable. So like I'm most comfortable in Airtable, but if someone's using Google Sheets, I can still make it work, right? Or I'm most comfortable in Beehive, but if someone's using ConvertKit for their newsletter, I can still make it work, right? So you get a little bit, once you are confident in the tools, you can become generally tool agnostic. And then you're just asking questions. Like if I ask you, Vikram, what is the part of your business that you feel a bottleneck, like could be more efficient? Chances are immediately you're going to say something that's like, yeah, it's client onboarding, it's sales, it's procurement, it's invoicing. There's always some gut feeling, and that's where I start. I say, all right, great. I got my list of questions. Let's get in there. I'm just going to record the call. I'm not going to take any notes because ultimately the conversation is where we're going to find a lot of those gems that say, yes, it does take 4 days to get this thing done. Or I hate that I have to copy and paste information from point A to point B. It's such a pain in the butt. Those are those types of little moments that we're looking for. And when we can add context of this is the part of my tech stack that's happening in, we can do a lot on the automation front. I hope did that make sense?
Yeah, that made sense. But I want to dive a little deeper
Mhm.
into the context of data, right? Like, so you have these people who can write SQL. And when you can write SQL, you have, like, let's say you have more flexibility at your hand. Like, you want to identify how many events happened, like how many people did XYZ. Those are relatively simple logics. And then you can also identify patterns of like how things are related. For someone who doesn't know coding, or let's say SQL, and is dealing with raw data sets, and this might not be a question related to what you are doing with like automation, but it's more towards the side of you that has dealt with no code. Like, how have you dealt with, let's say, working with raw data sets without knowing SQL or without knowing coding? Because I have had no one so far come here and talk. Like, even today when we are working on AI products, the default answer is, hey, this AI will write SQL for you, and like it will write a sequential analysis one after the other, and then it will give you the result. But if you want to really validate whether that result is right or wrong, you would need an analyst or a man in the loop, right? Like, so we can pretty much replicate what an analyst would do 90% faster than what they would do in. And if you still have your doubts, you need an analyst to verify whether the things that the AI did is right or wrong.
Mhm.
For someone who doesn't get SQL, how what does the Grant who's like played with no code tools say? Like, how do they handle being equally informed on raw data sets, right? Like, you have a certain power in your hand when you can write SQL. How can someone who doesn't know that be equally informed? Like, you can talk about tools, you can talk about processes, anything.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't want to be laughed at by your audience because I'm definitely not as technically savvy as they are. SQL I think is an excellent tool for getting into the database and really being able to query things quite uniquely. For me, when I'm thinking at the data sets that usually come to my attention, right, we're not talking about the millions of rows. So just to give some depth or some understanding of the size of data sets, we might be looking at the 5 to 20,000 sets, right? And at that point, with a tool like Airtable, if I can get a CSV of that data, I can put that into Airtable and use their filtering, grouping, sorting mechanisms to find the types of patterns that I'm looking for. So in that sense, I'm still playing with the strengths that I have with a tool like Airtable because I know how to move that data around, surface the things that are interesting to me, and make sure that I am presenting at least the right columns and filtering mechanisms to find the right set of solutions or outcomes. So I don't think that for the data sets that I'm looking at, a tool or a language like SQL and using a proper database are extremely necessary. And I know that eventually I'm going to need to get my technical knowledge up to a point where I can handle confidently a database with millions of rows. Like I know that that's essential. If not me, someone on my team. So I'll say that as like a preliminary thing that we're typically dealing with smaller data sets that people in your audience would probably laugh at. I know that that's okay. When it comes to the data tools that I wanted to bring up, there's so many AI data tools that are coming out and being tested. And like obviously we've got ChatGPT where you can give it an Excel file and ask it for a few tools. Like I'll give it lately, I've been working on a data project for an industry report. So I'll give it, a set of numbers, 100 different values and say, categorize these into 5, somewhat equally distributed buckets. So that's a tool, that's a query or a prompt that OpenAI can handle. But then you've also got tools like Blaze.tech, which is good for HIPAA compliant data analysis. You've got things like Thematic, it's getthematic.com for customer feedback analysis. So that's a lot of unstructured data that it's trying to pull insights out of. I don't know. I've got a few of these other AI tools saved just because I want to keep track of what the market's doing. But for the most part, Airtable, and some good OpenAI search queries will do the job for what I'm looking at.
Well, on a parallel note, not exactly related to what we
Mhm.
talked about, like, what are those tools that you love to use today from that list that you have? Like, I'm sure you have some favorites. Why are they favorites? Like, what are you thinking about that? Very curious. Personally, also very curious.
Yeah, so I've got this huge database that I've just been keeping of all pretty much every AI tool that I come across that I just want to either eventually get into, write a piece about, try to get in touch with the founders, honestly, would be really fun because I love just seeing what their product roadmap is. So there's one, and I kind of group these in different ways. So there's some are data analysis. I call some AI plumbing. So like there's one called build ship, and that is just for using as many APIs and connecting them with kind of an AI layer on top of that. And so you can really aggregate data in a very creative way in that takes your standard make integration up a notch. So that's something that I'm looking forward to playing with a little bit more. Looking through this, you've got a few new automation tools to compete with Zapier and Make. So one is called Respell, another one is Relay. I'm really interested in playing with those because I think that anyone that wants to challenge Zapier for that kind of like name recognition, I think is a very worthwhile endeavor, but it's an uphill battle for sure. So I don't know. I like to keep track of where the market is going. I'll pull up one more chatbot one. So there's one for creators and people who are trying to share themselves more asynchronously. It's called Coach Vox, VOX. That one's super cool for helping people who come to your website much more. It's like a chatbot with personality, and it's actually much more interactive than your standard. Like I was using the Zoom chat for support yesterday. Not a great experience, but Coach Vox is actually really nice for personality and getting something useful out of the chatbot.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure that I hyperlink all of them.
Mhm.
There's a bunch of names that I myself am not aware of in there for sure. So love to try them out. Thanks for sharing them, Grant. How big is your data list now? Like the tool list, sorry.
Ooh, I got it pulled up here. I'm at 122.
And is that like something you maintain on a daily basis?
Yeah, pretty much every newsletter that I get, everything that someone sends me, I got a little Airtable Clipper tool, so I can take a screenshot of the homepage, capture the URL, capture their logo, and just always kind of have this running list of curiosity. Like I'm not bored by any means, but if the day ever comes, I'll have plenty of things to read.
Yeah, wow. That sounds definitely like a lot of what I did. And then I realized that sometimes I have to also clean up what I am storing because it just
Yes.
keeps on piling. But I love it. Grant, take a step back, right? Like so now you're doing GrantBot and the whole process of consulting, uh, specifically on the idea that you're talking about, which is the process of automation and like working with digital footprints, or for that matter, capturing qualitative data. All of that is very, I'd say, like, first of all, you need to have a background, which I think you have because you were at Celonis, like you've seen what that world looks like. But even doing Celonis or like getting into that room with someone like Starbucks, chasing them for maybe 12 to 18 months before they actually like try on a smaller piece and then actually expanding into a bigger client or like expanding the ARR value, that's a very different world.
Hmm.
How are you thinking about, let's say, distributing based on whatever you have seen at this? Because I wanted to talk about how enterprise sales works based on whatever you have seen. And like, because you were the value architect at Celonis, this is less about Celonis, but in general, in the enterprise space, I think people are really bad. Like our founders struggle at communicating that value, which is why enterprise deals move slow. Of
Hmm.
course, on top is the whole complexity that an enterprise goes through and like the number of people you have to navigate. We ourselves at Crunch work only with enterprises, and things sometimes are so frustrating. We're like, oh my God, it's like 2 weeks for another 30-minute sync up call. And then again, the next call is after 3 weeks and so on. How are you thinking about your distribution? And like to any founder listening in, because we have some of them as well in our audience, what would you say is the best way to demonstrate the trust or the value to a customer?
Yeah. I think one thing that I'm learning right now, especially, is getting much better about asking questions and eventually getting to the right questions and knowing kind of which buttons you can push to find those problems, those pain points. But when we were talking about it earlier, right, I asked you, where do you feel the bottleneck in your business? And in my case, I'm just trying to find any pain point because typically there's room for automation. But if you're a founder, you should always be thinking, well, does my product actually solve the problem that they're facing? Like, am I trying to fit my solution to a customer, or am I letting the customer's problem find my solution? So it's definitely easier said than done because we all want to get revenue and make people happy. But ultimately, that's what I'm trying to work on the most right now, which is asking the right questions. And I don't think I told you this, but I did 2 years of a long distance relationship from Los Angeles to Rome. And communication is the only thing that kept that relationship alive. And I think it's the same thing in business too. It's like we want to be there for our leads and our clients. We want to make sure that they're happy, but we also need to make sure that we are communicating what our goals are and making sure those things are aligned. Like, is this an urgent matter for you? Is this a problem that's pressing for you? Because if it is, we're going to get there. We're going to get to that solution. And I'm always just trying to think of, am I asking the right questions? Am I being supportive? And ultimately, if I can treat my current clients well, that will hopefully lead me into the next business deal with a warm intro. So I think it's all about customer service and communication at the end of the day.
But do you believe frameworks have a role to play in that? For example, with the customers you were dealing with when you were back at Celonis, or like in your role, I'm sure you saw other value architects as well. uh, I've seen these people who go into these rooms and then they present like an Excel sheet or a PowerPoint, and those PowerPoints has like standard tables. And of course, those are like very well designed and thought of because the company is practically like those are product business use cases or something like that. And you have identified them with a lot of pain over the year, and you know who will see what as a value add. But
Hmm.
do you like see templates as being effective, or like when it comes to let's say establishing that value? And I'll tell you where we struggle. So this might get a little off topic, but so what, like that is
I'm
what
here
the
for it.
podcast. Yeah, so at Crunch, right, like what we do essentially is that we work with data sets. So if you have a warehouse, you have any kind of data lying in, we get deployed in two ways. One is an analyst team or a data science team itself can use us to fast track their day to day. Meaning, if let's say you are an e-commerce company and your boss somewhere goes and says, "Hey, we need to shut down a store location in Chicago. Out of the 10 stores we have, we need to close two of them down. Find out which ones and let us know why." It's a very tough question to answer because that analyst or the data team is now going to go on a sequence of queries. They will stitch things together. They will try identifying patterns. Sometimes there are no patterns. They will end up writing the wrong queries. Like there's a bunch of things that you have to do. Maybe over a period of 3, 4, 5 days, they will come with hypothetical suggestions saying that, hey, this is one store which you could close and this is how we see this panning out, right? Like, so this whole process that takes 5 days, we fast track that to
Hmm.
something like 90 minutes, 60 minutes, 30 minutes. 90 minutes is like a lot. That has never happened, but ideally, like anything within 15 to 20 minutes, you would have like something that would ideally take a human being. And 5 days, and it exactly follows the process that the human being would follow. So it makes an assumption, it writes the query for it, it stitches together, it sees that, oh, we made a mistake, it looks for anomalies, patterns, and whatnot. The
Hmm.
second way, so this interface that I just talked about for the data team, that's very code heavy. It's like you can select R, SQL, Python, which language, which data sets. You have to like map your business data to your raw data because revenue for one company might be something else, revenue for some other company might be something else, even though the raw data looks more or less the same. And then there is a second side, which is like the COO sitting there and thinking about what new business to expand into. They don't care about the code or the SQL. They don't care about that interface. For them, the question is, what new three things should I be launching? And then they just need the bullet list and maybe an explainer as to why, right?
Hmm.
Like, and of course, so it gets packaged in both of these ways. Now, the whole process of doing this is very slow because I need to go first understand that, oh, the CFO, pick a hypothetical company, pick a retail customer like, I don't know, Macy's. Like the CFO at Macy's defines revenue as this, right? Like, but the CRO at Macy's defines revenue as something else. And that is so true because the CFO may maybe look at revenue as uh, total closed revenue, right? Like, and the CRO may just look at it as the total booked revenue.
Hmm.
And those are very technical terms because it changes everything. So you have to go through that process of mapping. And
Hmm.
then you have to identify the right champion. Then you have to do like a bunch of demos. Of course, the security process has concerns. Then you identify what is the value add that you're going to deliver. You go deliver that value. Then you try actually convincing them that, hey, you see, like what has worked on a smaller project is actually going to work at a large scale as well. And this is how the business impact is going to come in. All of this that I'm talking about is something we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it's
Yep.
extremely slow. Sometimes it's extremely frustrating. And when you were talking about Celonis, I was thinking, oh my God, like if I put myself in the shoe of someone who is going and deploying that, it's actually even tougher because
Yep.
you have to go convince them that, hey, you need to, for some reason, have a digital footprint. In the case of the Coke bottle that we talked about, that machine which is actually packaging it maybe doesn't record the timestamp, or maybe it records the timestamp, but that doesn't throw that timestamp out onto a cloud server, or it doesn't, like these machines don't talk to each other. So you are not just walking into a room and showing them what they can do, you're also telling them that what they're doing is not enough and that they need to change a lot of things. That is a
Hmm.
very painful process, right? Like for a founder. And I'm sure a lot of founders right now who are listening to this are maybe thinking about, oh my God, this has happened for me as well. This has happened. In your experience, what is the best way to create that value quicker? You could take
Yeah.
the example of Crunch, you could take the example of Celonis, you could take the example of a third company. That's all fine.
Yeah, this is a question that I'm facing right now as I try to talk to some of these Celonis partners and consultants because they're charging tens of thousands of dollars for a pilot that might not, might work, might show them everything they want in the promised land, but it also could not. And if it does work, it's a $10,000 investment before a multi-$100,000 investment. So like that is a mental math for a CFO that's like, I'm going to spend 75K on a contract that might fizzle and it takes me 6 months to see any value. That's really tough. So I think that the question that I always think about when I talk with some of these Celonis people is how can we speed up that time to value in the smallest way? And so this is something that I was talking about at the very beginning, which was how can I go in and find 3 things to automate and say, great, here's 3 automations. We just built them in your account, free, right? We just did it. This is the benefit. All I needed was a few hours with someone on your accounts receivable team. I built some automations. Here's what it looks like, and just sit with them for a week and feel the automation or the lack of work that you have to do, right? So in the Celonis case, how can we move an automation to the front of the sales process instead of the end of client fulfillment? And in your case, how could I make the smallest data connector that if you just, like the example, the easiest one to come to mind is like you log into an app and it says login with Google. So how can I get a login with Google type of experience that allows someone to get the smallest taste of value immediately in the sales process or earlier in the sales process? Because that makes the big close easier. Because ultimately we're climbing that ladder. You're climbing that ladder of convincing that client that this is the opportunity that they've been waiting for to solve their problems. And if we can't show a little bit of value here, build a little bit of trust there, work our way up the mountain, it's going to be a pretty tough sell. So, I mean, I'm in no way an expert at this. I am very much learning at the same time, asking questions, figuring it out. But this is kind of like my big goal right now is how can I show value as early and as often as possible on the way to that ultimate close. I hope that's helpful, but I think that's a good thought experiment for people.
No, that's a very honest answer. And on that, like, I often see founders debating whether it makes sense to be in the same city as where your customer is. And you just talked about the long distance relationship part. And I love how you frame that, or like draw a parallel between long distance relationships in personal life and like a customer relationship that you have for a renewal of a deal or whatever. I love it. So I'm with you. And plus, love the transparency with which you gave that answer.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely.
Grant, we are unfortunately nearing the end. So I want to ask one question, which I have always asked someone, and it could be related to the episode or it could be something out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
Look back on your life and tell me, like, what is that one learning you would love to share with everyone who's listening in?
Man, if everyone knew that they could think of a future state, think of a future that they wanted, and just say, what's one thing I can do to get one step closer to that? I think a lot of people would be able to do a lot more. And to hit it home, because I've already shared my love story, that same long distance relationship, I met this woman in Canada. I said, hey, I think we can make this work. Let's just take it one day at a time. 2 years went by. Now I'm in Spain. We're living together. We're getting married in a couple months. And that is like unbelievably far of a dream when we met. Like, there's no way that we're going to make it work, Rome to Los Angeles. And it was just one day. What can I do? How can I work at a company like Boeing that would allow me to get a job in Europe? They're not going to let me. What am I going to do? I'm going to get a master's in Europe. I'm just going to climb that ladder. It's just small actions that compound. So set what your goal is, dream big, dream a goal that actually makes you really happy, and it'll make it a lot easier to get after it.
Yeah, easier said than done, but
100%.
take the first step that you should. And congratulations on the wedding that is coming in shortly. I'm super happy, and I'm sure the people who are listening in would also like have a lot of thoughts, but you added that personal touch and it just makes the whole episode very lively. It's interesting what you're working on. I'll have my eyes out on, and like, Godspeed. Thank you, Grant. It was a pleasure having you.
Likewise. Thank you.